Good morning, everyone, and welcome once again to another webinar Seniors Action Quebec is putting together. I know today you're going to be extremely pleased and get a lot of valuable information. We have two excellent presenters. As you were reminded, please put your questions as you think of them. Don't wait till the last minute in the chat box. And Katia, the Executive Director of Seniors Action Quebec, will be asking them off the presenters. Right away, I would like to thank the Secrétariat aux relations avec les Québécoises d'expression anglaise for the funding that allowed us to produce these webinars. We also want to thank our ongoing partner, Éducaloi, for their support with this project, as they have done so in the past. Our first presenter is a longtime friend and supporter of Seniors Action Quebec and very busy gentleman, and we certainly thank him for giving us his valuable time and expertise. Maître Goldman, who is a lawyer and a plain language specialist with Éducaloi. He provides support to the Anglophone community groups across Quebec, offering legal information to the public. Rick has been a lawyer for more than 30 years. He has a wealth of experience with the community sector. He was the staff lawyer at Project Genesis, a Montreal community group, advocating for housing, welfare, and other social rights. He also serves as coordinator on the Committee to Aid Refugees. In addition to working at Éducaloi, Rick also serves as supervising lawyer at Just Solutions Legal Clinic of the Montreal City Mission. So we can see how busy he is. We appreciate your time, Rick. Thank you once again for doing this for us, and I'm going to turn it over to you immediately. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ruth, for that very generous introduction. I'm definitely not too busy to participate in a great meeting like this, which is bringing important information to the public. So I think we could get started right away with the slides. So let's go to that's about the second or third. Let's go back to the beginning. Okay, so our topic today, at request of Seniors Action Quebec, my topic, what I'll be presenting is rent increases and Reno-Evictions. So let's please go to the next slide. So Ruth mentioned, of course, this project is Seniors Action Quebec in collaboration with Éducaloi. Some of you may be quite familiar with Éducaloi, others may be less so. So I'll just mention that we are a nonprofit, non-governmental organization. We do receive various types of funding, including from the government, but we're completely independent of the government. And our mission is, like today, to explain the law, people's rights, people's obligations in an easy to understand manner. So we really underline understandable. That's our aim, whether it be with an article on our website, whether it be with a workshop. If something is not clear, please let us know, and we will try to improve our game a little bit. So here you see our website, educaloi.qc.ca. So just to mention, there are different sections. In the news, just looking at the left-hand side, you'll see the menu. In the news, it's sort of latest breaking news, a new law, a new court case that changes the law. That's where you'll find it. The law by topic, we're going to take a look in a second at some of the things you'll find there. And that's where, for example, you would find everything I'm covering today and in more detail. And we're going to look at some examples of what you would find there in just a moment. Our web guides are where we bring together articles on different topics, for example, housing, but also we have a web guide for seniors, which brings together articles of particular interest to seniors, and a web guide for new arrivals and so on. Publications, the next one down, is where you can order, sorry, not slide, just I'm still on the menu. Publications on the left-hand side menu is where you can order print copies of our publications. Everything is free of charge at Éducaloi. We're a nonprofit, as I mentioned before, and so if you're with an organization and you want 100 copies of our guide on wills, for example, it will be sent to you free of charge. Even the postage is free. The About section is where you'll find out more about us as an organization, the members of our team. We're about 35 people on the team, lawyers, notaries, education specialists, etc. As you can see, even below that, you see FR. You can toggle between French and English. Our website is almost completely mirror image with about 1,000 pieces of content in English and the same in French. So let's go now to the next slide, please. So here's some examples. If you clicked on the law by topic, you would find rental housing. So here's some examples. So for of what you would find, this is the top of an article. So if you clicked on this, you would see a detailed article about this. So responsibilities of landlords. Let's go to the next slide, please. Responsibilities of tenants. Then the next slide. Renewing a residential lease and rent increases, which is already getting right into the topic of today. So as you can see on our website, if you click the law by topic, you'll be able to find all the information you're hearing today and in much more detail. And by the way, Seniors Action Quebec is very welcome to share these slides with anybody who would like them. There's no problem with that. So let's continue, please. So what is our workshop for today? We're going to look at the Tribunal Administratif du Logement, or TAL for short. This is what used to be called the Régie du Logement, or Rental Board. And I will say that 99% of people still just refer to it as the Régie du Logement, or the Rental Board in English. However, the official name changed about 2 years ago to TAL. So you may hear either Rental Board or TAL, or Tribunal Administratif du Logement. So we're going to look briefly at them. Then the main topics of today: rent increases and moving out, if you prefer not to have a rent increase and you prefer to find another place. And then the topic of renovations and Reno-Evictions. Okay, so let's continue, get into the material with the next slide, please. Okay, so as I mentioned, we're starting with the Tribunal Administratif, the TAL, or Rental Board. There is their website. As with many things, you can just, if you were just Google TAL, you'll go to their website. They have a very informative website. A lot of it is similar to the content that we have on Éducaloi in terms of basic information. There's some terms that you will see. We try to make things as simple as possible at Éducaloi. So if you look at one of our articles, we'll say landlord. But the legal term, which you might see on the TAL website, is lessor. Same thing for tenant. We will say tenant because people understand what a tenant is, right? But they will say lessee because that's the legal term. So if you see lessor, lessee, you understand. We will say cancel a lease, or cancel a lease and evict a tenant. They will say resiliation. So just so you know those terms if you ever hear them. Now, one very useful thing about the TAL website, which we don't do at Éducaloi, is they have different forms available. For example, if you go on their website, you'll see a section for forms. There's a prepared form to refuse a rent increase. Now, you don't have to put much information if you want to refuse a rent increase. It's pretty simple, but to make it even simpler, they have a prepared form for that. So all you have to do is like fill in the basic info, your name, the landlord's name, and so on. They also have people on hand. They have sort of legal assistants there who can help you if you want to start a case. You can reach them by phone, or you can go over in person. Not that accessible though, because I think the only office now in Montreal is at the Olympic Village. They used to have offices all around town. Maybe they still have some others, but they're certainly not as accessible as a few years ago. So you can reach them by phone if you have questions, and also if you have decided to start a case, whether you be a landlord or a tenant. Okay, so that's the tribunal. And so let's go to the next slide. And as Ruth mentioned, if you do have questions, please, you can write them in the chat. And we have about 20 minutes of my time, of my presentation time reserved for questions. So our first major topic is rent increases. So let's continue. So here's a little quiz to make things a bit interactive today. So what do you think was the average percent rent increase granted by the TAL, by the rental board in 2022? You can write your answer in the chat. Of course, nobody's forced to participate, but you're very welcome to. Do you think it was 2%, 4%, or 10? So you could write either 2, 4, or 10 in the chat. We'll give you just a moment, and then whoever is I'm not sure if it's Brendan or Ruth who's keeping an eye on the chat.
Yeah, we're monitoring it. We're getting a bunch of 4s and 2s at the moment. Difficult to keep track of how many, but
Okay.
There's a bunch.
There's a mix of 2s and 4s, basically.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, so let's go to the next slide. And so nobody was thrown off and thought it was as high as 10%. The average was about 4, and that's actually higher than most years because we had very high inflation last year, and that's one thing that's taken into account. So given that we had something like 5-6% inflation, 4% doesn't seem that bad. And a lot of years, we had many years of 1-2% inflation, and the rent increase, the average rent increase was about 1 or 2%. Okay, so that gives you an idea of what happens when you take a case to the rental board. So let's continue. Okay, so here are the basic rules. The landlord can ask for an increase once a year, even if you have a shorter lease. Almost everybody in Quebec has a 1-year lease, or at least the majority, and the majority run from July 1st to June 30th. But some people have 6 months leases or even 3 months leases. That doesn't affect the landlord's right to ask for rent increases. They can ask only once a year. Now, taking the most typical situation, I mentioned most people have a 12-month lease. And so the landlord must give you a notice 3 months before. And if we take the most typical case, the person who has their lease that comes up for renewal on July 1st, what does this mean? The landlord must send the notice by March 31st. So if you have the typical lease, okay, let's say, okay, we're in the middle of your lease now, we're October, your lease is coming up for renewal next July. If you don't get anything from the landlord by March 31st, then you have no increase. Okay. So another important point is there's no maximum to what the landlord can ask. Okay, just as I can go up to somebody on the street and ask them, could you give me $20? Of course, I may not get a very pleasant response, but there's nothing stopping me from asking that. Just as there's nothing stopping a landlord from asking 10%, 20%, 30%. However, you have the right to refuse, and then as we'll see, the rental board will decide. So, but the point is, the landlord, the sky's the limit. The landlord can ask what they want, but they will be limited by the rental board if you refuse. So you have, again, looking at it from the tenant's perspective, 1 month to refuse or accept. Okay, so you get your rent increase notice, let's say March 15th for your lease that's coming up on July 1st. You get it March 15th, so you got 1 month till April 15th to refuse or to accept the increase. Okay, so let's continue. So if you refuse, okay, so here we're continuing with the rules. If you refuse, so let's look at a real world, or at least real dates, real possible dates. You get your rent increase next year at March 15th. You refuse on March 20th. Then the landlord has 1 month to file at the rental board. So an important thing is, sometimes tenants get rent increase notice and say, oh, I don't want to start running, going to the rental board and starting a case against my landlord. That's not how it works. If you're a tenant, you don't have to do anything. All you have to do is refuse. Then it's completely up to the landlord to go to the rental board, and the landlord will have to show what their real costs were. They'll have to show their increase in their, if there is an increase in their taxes, in the heating costs, if they're heating your unit, or the heating costs for the building, for any major repairs and so on. So it will be based on the landlord's actual increase. As we saw this past year, it was 4%. But typically it's been more in the region of 2%. Okay, so let's recap. You get your rent increase notice March 15th. You refuse March 20th. And then the landlord has until April 20th to take the case to the rental board. You don't have to lift a finger. You'll be called to a hearing sometime in the following months, and then the whole burden is on the landlord to prove their costs. You don't have to come with all kinds of proof, with witnesses, whatever. It's the whole burden is on the landlord. Okay, so let's continue. Now, let's say you want to move out. Okay, let's look at a slightly different scenario. You get your rent increase notice March 15th, but you actually, for whatever reason, whether you're afraid that the increase will be too large, even though if you contest it, it probably won't be that big, but or you want to find other types of housing. You're a senior, you want to move into residence, whatever, and you decide that you want to move out July 1st. Now, you have to be very, very careful here. If you don't do anything, that you don't answer, your lease will be renewed automatically. Okay, so this is something not everybody realizes. I think most people in Quebec who have, lived in Quebec for a long time or their whole lives know about this, but some don't, and especially maybe people who moved from another province may not realize that if you don't do anything, you don't answer your landlord, your lease is automatically renewed. So what does this mean? If you want to leave at the end of your lease, you have to give 3 months notice before the end of the lease. Or that's if you didn't get a rent increase notice, or within 1 month of receiving the rent increase notice. So let's look at those two situations. You don't get a rent increase notice. You get nothing from the landlord, nothing at all. Your lease is coming up for renewal July 1st. So you have to tell it now. You have to do something if you want to move out. You have to tell the landlord by March 31st that you want to move out on July 1st and you are not renewing your lease. So that's very important. If you don't do anything, you might not think about it. You might think, oh, this is good news. I didn't get anything from my landlord. But if you want to leave, it's not so good news if you don't do anything. You have to inform the landlord. Otherwise, you're going to be stuck with your lease for another year. Now, last situation on this slide, let's say you get the rent increase notice on March 15th, okay, next year, and you want to move out. So you have to answer within a month and tell the landlord that you don't want to renew your lease. You're not renewing your lease and you're moving out July 1st. If you don't tell them within that month, if you don't do anything, you will be stuck with the lease for another year. Okay, so these are some rules that are very important to remember. And of course, I see different people popping up in the chat. I can't read the questions as we go. I think Ruth will be looking at them, or Katja, I'm not sure.
Yeah, we'll get to the questions soon.
Yeah, and we'll have plenty of time to answer those. So let's continue, please, with the next slide. So now the second major part of the presentation, renovations and so-called Reno-Evictions. So let's continue. Next slide, please. Okay, so in order to understand this notion, we hear a lot about so-called Reno-Evictions. And we're going to talk about what that means. But before we can talk about what that means, we actually have to understand what is the legal situation when it comes to renovations. So and I'll tell you right away, this is spoiler alert. By renovations, we mean repairs or improvements to apartment, not changing the apartment or demolishing it, but repairs or improvements. And I'm going to give you a spoilers alert right now, because this is, I think, one of the most important messages of this presentation. A landlord can never cancel a person's lease and evict them just to do renovations, to do repairs and improvements to the apartment. That can never happen. And we're going to see in detail, how all of this works. So if, and there's many, many scenarios. Sometimes renovations are done with the tenant still living in the apartment. Okay, that would be when it's less major, like, they're not redoing the whole kitchen or redoing the whole bathroom. So if no vacancy, if the tenant doesn't have to leave, the landlord must give 10 days notice. If the tenant has to leave the apartment, then the landlord must offer compensation to the tenant for the cost of moving in, moving out, and the difference in rent while they're away from the, while the renovations are taking place. So but going back to the situation, if no vacancy is required, but the tenant considers the situation abusive, then the tenant here has to do something. They have 10 days to apply to the rental board to contest it and say, look, this is abusive for whatever reason. Like, my apartment's in good condition, the landlord is just trying to inconvenience me, and the rental board will decide the case. But this isn't the most typical. The most typical is the tenant has to leave the apartment for several months. So let's go to the next slide, please. Okay, so the most typical is this. The tenant has to leave, usually 2, 3, 4 months. Now, once we're even over a week, okay, once the tenant has to leave for over a week, the landlord has to give 3 months notice. So quite a lengthy notice. So, you can't be taken by surprise and find out 2 weeks before that you're going to have to leave for a few months. Okay. Now, if you have to leave at all, and like I say, the typical thing is the tenant has to leave 2 or 3 or 4 months, you have 10 days as a tenant to answer. But a good thing here, which is different from the rent increase notice, is if you don't answer, okay, the landlord asks you to leave your apartment for any period of time because they're doing renovations, and you don't answer, then you're considered to have refused. This is a very good protection. I wish it was the same for rent increases. With rent increase, remember, if you don't answer, you've accepted. So I wish, honestly, there was one rule that said, if you don't answer, you've refused in any situation. Or even if you don't answer, you've accepted in any situation. Maybe that would be better. But there's a mix of rules, and this can be quite confusing. So I'm just going to repeat. If you get a rent increase notice and you don't answer, you've accepted. If you get a notice to leave your apartment for renovations and you don't answer, you've refused. And then, in talking about renovations, the landlord will have to go to the rental board I'm saying rental board, as you can see, because that's the common term we still use for the tribunal. We'll have to ask the rental board's permission to go ahead with, well, sorry, missing a word there, with the work. So let's go to the next slide. Okay, so if the case comes before the rental board, the whole burden is on the landlord. They have to show that the work and the conditions are reasonable. They have all the necessary permits and plans. So here again, a tenant can say, look, my apartment's in okay condition. The landlord wants to redo the kitchen and the bathroom. Everything is fine. This is just a way to try to get me out of the apartment. And then the rental board will decide. The landlord also has to show if they're doing, I mean, almost everything from what I can see in Quebec, when any kind of work inside an apartment, any kind of major work takes a permit. And for that, you have to show plans. So the landlord has to show they have all the necessary permits and plans. And also, you can say as a tenant, the landlord's offering me whatever, $200 a month to live someplace else for 4 months. That's not enough. I have to find a temporary apartment. It's going to cost me $500 more a month. This 200 is not sufficient. You can say anything you want, and it's up to the landlord to prove that what they're doing is reasonable, and then the rental board will decide. And if the rental board decides that the landlord hasn't adequately justified that what they're trying to do is not reasonable, they can refuse the permission to do the work. Okay, so let's continue, please. Okay, so can the landlord, well, I answered this already. Can the landlord evict you to do renovations? We'll just go to the next slide because I answered it already. No, and let's continue. After renovations are done, you have the right to return to your apartment. So the landlord can, and I said this at the beginning with my spoiler alert, the landlord can't say to you, I want to redo your bathroom, I want to redo your kitchen, I'm canceling your lease, I'm evicting you. They cannot do it, it's illegal. After the renovations are done, you have the right to return to your apartment, and the rent will be the same as before until the next lease renewal. We're going to see what we mean by that. The landlord can ask for rent increase at the time of the renewal. So let's go to the next slide. Okay, so here's an example, all right? You have a 12-month lease running from July 1st to June 30th, the typical lease in Quebec. You leave for renovations for 4 months from September to December. Okay, it could be this year. Let's say the renovations are going on now. You left in September, you're coming back December 1st. Or what actually, well, end of December, coming back in January. When you return in January, your rent will be the same as before you left. Okay, even though the landlord has redone your bathroom or your kitchen, your rent will not increase when you move back in January. However, the landlord can ask for a large increase when the lease is renewed July 1st. Okay, so that's not right away, but it will be coming, which is, you know, something that tenants have to think about. So let's move on. Okay, now there is an exception, and it's different from renovations, but a lot of people get this confused, and it is confusing. There are certain situations in which a landlord can evict a tenant for very major projects. So this isn't just like, you know, redoing your bathroom, redoing your kitchen, you know, putting new windows. This is something different. This is something like changing the use of the apartment. So it's not rare, for example, like if you go on Park Avenue in Montreal, one time it was all residential on the ground floor. Now all of the ground floor, just about all of them on Park Avenue, have been changed into commercial. Okay, they're little stores on the ground floor and there's apartments upstairs. So the landlord wants to change an apartment from residential to commercial, let's say a store or an office, they can evict a tenant. They can evict a tenant if they want to subdivide the unit. So you're living in an 8.5 and the landlord wants to make 2 4.5s. Sadly, they can evict you for that. And the reverse, enlarge the unit. The landlord has a bunch of 2.5s. They have a rooming house, say, or one room. They want to make a few larger apartments, a few 4 or 5 room apartments. They can evict people for that, or demolish completely. Okay, so that is a possibility as well. And this is, again, I really want to emphasize this is very different from just repairing or improving your existing apartment. Okay, so that is a kind of exception to a situation where a landlord can do work and can evict you, because the general rule is the landlord does work, they cannot evict you. So let's continue. Okay, so there are very, very important rules around these major projects. The landlord has to give 6 months notice before the end of the lease. So if the landlord wants to change your apartment into an office or a store on July 1st, they have to let you know by December 31st. If you disagree, you can apply to the rental board. The landlord will have to show once again, they have all the proper permissions and plans. And also, just like with renovations, they have to offer you compensation for leaving, this time leaving permanently. And they have to justify to the rental board that everything they're doing is reasonable. Otherwise, the rental board can refuse permission to do the work. Okay, so let's continue. So now we come to the term Reno-Evictions. What does it mean? Okay, so the Reno-Evictions is not a legal term. You won't find it in any law. So it's a term that's come up in everyday language, and it means usually one of two situations. So either the tenant had the right to return after renovations. So this is my first scenario. The landlord and let's use exactly the same example, okay? The landlord started doing renovations in September. They're 4 months renovations. You're allowed to return June. You're allowed to return January 1st, but maybe you don't want to because it involves 2 moves. You're moving out to a temporary apartment for 4 months, and you're moving back to your apartment 4 months later. Now, 1 move every 10 years, most people find about as much as they can take. How about 2 moves in 4 months? Not a lot of people don't want to do that. And you're going to know that you're going to get in next July a large rent increase. So a lot of tenants will be very discouraged in this situation and will just leave. Okay, they'll just leave, and the landlord has indirectly evicted them by doing renovation, So that's what sometimes, usually one use of the term renovictions is. Another one is the exception that I showed you. The landlord did a type of major project that allowed eviction, changing the use of your apartment into a store or an office, for example. And people, even though that's not strictly speaking renovations, people will think of that as a type of renovation, and it's combined with eviction. So that's why people use the term renoviction. Okay, so let's continue. Okay, so remember, you do have rights in any of these situations. The tenant has rights. You have the right to refuse renovations or major projects, whatever it is. You have the right to refuse, and then the landlord has to prove to the rental board that what they're doing is reasonable. They have all the permits, they've offered you the proper compensation, the work is reasonable, and so on. And of course, you have the right to return to your apartment when it's just renovations, with all the inconveniences that I mentioned. 2 moves in a few months, and you're going to face a rent increase, but you do have those rights. Okay, let's continue. So here are some resources. So our own Éducaloi, if you click on the law by topic, there's the section renting, which covers everything I've covered and in more detail. The tribunal itself, the former rental board. So we saw that if you just Google TAL, T-A-L, you will find it. And as I mentioned, they have a lot of helpful articles and forms, such as the form to refuse a rent increase. The CAP, Assistance and Complaint Projects for Tenants of Private Seniors Residence, not really the topic today. We had another webinar about year and a half ago on that, on seniors residences, but they could be useful if anybody here is in a seniors residence. And some community justice centers, they are a free resource across Quebec for consulting about a legal situation and getting legal information. Let's continue, please. Okay, and then some of you may be landlords. So there's a landlord situation, landlords association. There's Comité Logement, housing or renters committees all across the province. Now, I know it's maybe hard to scribble down these all these links. So, of course, as I mentioned, Seniors Action Quebec is free to share this presentation with you. Project Genesis, for those of you in Montreal, where, as Ruth mentioned, I worked many years ago. They are a housing rights, among other things, advocacy group. The Legal Information Center at McGill. This is more for people in Montreal. Mile End Legal Clinic, Young Bar of Montreal, to prepare you if you have a hearing at the tribunal. And I think that's just about it. Can we go to the next slide? Yes, we're at the question period at exactly 10:34, within a minute of our schedule.
Well done. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rick. This
My
was
pleasure.
excellent, and I saw the questions were coming in. There's plenty of them. So without further ado, I'm going to turn them over immediately to Katya, who's going to be asking the questions of you. I just can't see Katya, so I guess she's there.
I'm here. Hi. Okay, Rick, I know you got to leave at 10:50, so I'm gonna, a lot of questions came in, so I'm just gonna kind of merge some of them, and I'm gonna give them to you in blocks. Is that okay?
Yes.
Cool. All right, so first set of question was about the rules the procedures. So 3 months notice. If you don't say anything, your lease is renewed. So
Yes.
questions came up about what are the procedures and are they the same rules for seniors who live in residences if their rent is going up and in low cost housing?
Okay, so seniors residences have a normal lease, and yes, the procedure is the same. Low-cost housing is completely different. It's done on the basis of your income. You have to produce your if you're asking this and you're in low-cost housing, you're very familiar with this. You have to give your the proof of your income every year, and the rent is calculated at 25%. I believe it's 20%, unless they changed it, of your monthly income. So you have no recourse to the rental board, but your rent is set at a much more affordable rent than many people have to pay. That's why it's called low-cost housing.
Okay. And if someone wants to contest a rent increase in either, I don't know if it would work
Well,
in a low
Asha,
cost or in a seniors.
okay, in a senior's residence, it's the same as any resident, as any private lease. All you have to send the notice, which you can get from the rental board website, or write out by hand, just saying I refuse the increase, but I want to stay in my apartment. Send it to the landlord within 30 days. Make sure to send it by a reliable means, such as registered mail, and then the ball is completely in the landlord's court. As I said, the landlord, you don't have to lift a finger after that. The landlord has to go to the rental board, open a case. You'll be called to a hearing where even there you don't have to lift a finger. The landlord has to justify every cent of the increase in their costs, and then the rental board will use their formula to calculate the increase, which, as we saw, was 4% last year, and even that was high compared to recent years.
Okay, and a question just came in about the procedures for an HLM.
I don't know if there's any way to contest your lease. Your rent. I'm sorry. I know how it's calculated. If you disagree, there's probably a mechanism, which I'm just not familiar with. For that, I would say contact the housing committee, Comité Logement in your area, or a Centre de Justice de Proximité. Or if you're in Montreal, we have those other resources like McGill Legal Info Clinic or Mile End Clinic. All of which are free of charge.
Okie dokes. And 2 questions came in about if someone lives in a dwelling where there's no lease. So for example, someone gave the example of they just don't have a lease. And the other example was, what if a senior gave, like, let's say a duplex to a family member, but they live downstairs, but there's no actual lease, but someone lives upstairs, and then there's a rent increase or something gets complicated. What can someone do in a procedure like that where there's an informal agreement or absolutely no lease?
Okay, so they're both kind of similar. There's always a lease, okay? Unless you tell somebody you're my, whatever, you're my parents, so I let you live upstairs for free. If there's any kind of a rent payment situation, there's a lease. So a lot of people do. It's an excellent question about what if I don't have a lease? Everybody has a lease, but as long as you're there, you're not squatting. You didn't break in and squatting. You're there with the landlord's permission, and you're paying a rent. You have a lease. You just don't have a written lease. In Quebec, verbal leases, that is, a spoken lease, is a legally valid lease. It's perfectly valid in legal terms. If a case should come to the rental board, okay, so let's use this. Let's use the first example. Somebody's living in an apartment. They moved in 2 years ago. The landlord said, I don't bother with paper. You can live in this apartment, 2.5 in the basement. You pay me $500 a month. I don't want to write anything down. All right, so 2 years, you're paying $500 a month. Then you get a rent increase notice. You can refuse it. I'm not sure if it's the people are worried more from the landlord's perspective or the tenant's perspective. But if the case comes to the rental board, then the proof is made before the rental board of the existence of the lease. How is it made? You testify, whether you're the tenant or the landlord. This person, if you're the landlord, for example, this person is there. I told them they could stay. They've been paying $500 a month. Here's the proof that they've been paying $500 a month. I mean, it gets even more complicated if everything is cash. So let's not complicate things too much. Let's assume there's at least a paper trail that they've been paying $500 a month. Then the rental board will say, okay, they have a lease, $500 a month. You're asking for a 10% increase. What are your costs? Okay, we'll calculate your costs. Then they calculate the increase, whether it's 2% or 4%. The same thing basically with the in-laws upstairs. You to say to your in-laws, we have an apartment upstairs. We love you. Move upstairs. Pay us $500 a month. Okay, but then one time you ask them for rent increase, they're not too happy about it. It goes to the rental board. The same thing will happen. The proof will be made before the rental board of the existence of the lease, and the rental board has no problem dealing with that.
Okay, super. A few more questions about procedures. A couple of questions came in about what if landlords give their tenants more than 3 months notice? So say 6 months.
Sorry,
what
I should have been more precise. That's the minimum. It's 3 to 6 months. Sorry, I should have really, I'm gonna, as I said, we want to explain things in an understandable manner, and that was an important piece of information that's missing, which I'm going to note here.
You're doing okay. Don't apologize. You're doing great.
Thank you. So but we always want to make things clear. So
For sure.
3 to 6 months. So let's use our classic example, March 30. Okay. Your lease is coming up for renewal next July 1st. It's a 12-month lease. I mentioned correctly that your landlord must give you the notice by March 31st. But what I didn't mention, and this question is very helpful in that sense, they can give it as early as January 1st. January 1st might be a little difficult because there's no postal delivery, but it's 3 to 6 months before the end of the lease. And this can put people in a difficult situation because you could be like, you know, wonderful, Happy New Year. 2 days ago, you're still recovering from the party. January 3rd, you open up your mail, registered mail from the landlord. July 1st, I want a 10% rent increase. And you have to say, okay, what do I do? Do I want to stay and contest? Do I accept? Probably not if it's a very large increase. Do I want to leave because I wasn't so happy with the place anyway? It's the beginning of winter and you have to face these choices. But those are the rules, 3 to 6 months.
Okay. What happens if someone refuses to sign a new lease with another increase? So let's say the year before they got an increase and then they know there's going to be another increase.
Whether you sign or not, sign a new document doesn't matter. So let's look at different scenarios. You got a rent increase notice last year. The case went to the rental board. The rental board gave you the average 4% increase. The landlord might say, okay, let's sign a new lease with the 4% increase. And you say, no, I don't want to sign anything. It doesn't matter. The rental board decision is what modifies your lease. So now it's the lease plus the rental board decision that actually becomes your lease. So if your rent was $1,000 and you got a 4% increase, your rent is now legally $1,040. And if in the future the landlord goes back to the rental board, he or she will have to take your lease, your original lease for $1,000 plus the most recent decision of the rental, because this could go on for years. People could be 20 years in a place, never sign a new lease, go to the rental board every year or many times over 20 years. There could be 7, 10, 15 decisions. It's your original lease plus the most recent decision of the rental board that becomes your lease.
Okay, so that kind of ties in perfectly with the question that just came in. So someone was asking for clarification about for seniors or people 70 plus living in an apartment for 10 plus years. So I guess what the idea is, if you live in an apartment for more than 10 years, your rent is capped or it's kind of controlled. So
everybody's rent is controlled. The one protection for seniors is and it's not the topic for today, so we can't go too far into it, but you're protected against having the landlord move in or move a relative in. If you're a senior, I'm not even sure, I think it's 75, but sorry, it's not the topic today, so I don't have it in front of me, and you are low income. you would qualify for the low cost housing cutoff. So it's a combination of those two things. And then your landlord couldn't move themselves in or move in a relative. But it's really not the topic of today. The fact of being a senior in itself doesn't affect your rights about rent increases. Everybody has the right to refuse a rent increase and have it set by the rental board.
But do you know if there's any protection for in a situation that there could be a possible rent eviction, or that they have to temporarily move because of renovations, like if they want to redo the kitchen, for example? Is there any legal recourse for seniors?
There's no special legal recourse. It's the same as anyone. Let's say your landlord wants to redo your kitchen and you feel your kitchen is perfectly fine and it's basically an excuse to try to get you out, to discourage you from, get you to leave temporarily and discourage you from coming back. And then if you do come back, hit you with a large rent increase when really the work wasn't necessary, then you have the right to refuse. And here, again, if the landlord was asking you to leave temporarily, you're very well protected, because even if you don't know your rights and you don't answer, you're considered to have refused, and the landlord has to take the case to the rental board. But to answer your first question, the situation is the same for seniors. I would think this is not in the law anywhere, but I would think that the rental board would view the reasonableness of the work taking into account the senior. If it's a senior who obviously would have a lot of difficulty leaving and coming back, then I believe the rental board, and the kitchen, using that example, is in good condition. It's not a new kitchen, but it's in good condition. I think it's quite possible the rental board will say this is not reasonable, whereas they might have said something different if it was a student who's 25 and has lived there 1 year or something.
Okay. So there's about 4 questions that have come in and 4 questions before. So I'm going to try and merge this.
Okay.
But it's the whole thing about the max increase or an acceptable increase per year in rent. So for example, if someone is saying, like there's a document somewhere that says the max increase that will be allowed is, say, 4%, but then they find it's a 5%, or what constitutes it? Does a new roof mean that's a 4% increase? Right. If you can just maybe re-explain.
It's okay. So there is a fairly accessible tool that the rental board puts out every January, where they give what they think will be the normal increase for different situations. For example, the landlord is heating and they're heating with gas. The landlord is heating, they're heating with electricity, or the tenant is responsible for heating. So that will give you an idea of what to expect. So let's say, for example, this year it was 2% if the tenant is heating, the landlord's not heating, and you get hit with a 5% rent increase demand, or a 10%. You can assume that's excessive, but it gets very complicated when there's major work done, and it's really quite a complicated formula. I'll give an example just because it comes up a lot. If the landlord put $100,000 of renovations in your apartment, they'll get about a $300 a month rent increase. But how are you going to, like, if there's a roof and there are 20 tenants, then it's divided by 20. So it becomes very complicated. And it's almost impossible to know for sure how much you're going to get. So you can talk to your landlord. You can say, explain to me. And there's another form that the rental board provides for the landlord to calculate how much the rent increase should be, which eventually the rental board will use if the case comes to the rental board. You can ask for the landlord to share that with you and see what you think. Maybe you think it's crazy. It couldn't have cost $500,000 to do the roof, and and the landlord will never be able to convince the rental board of that. So you can ask the landlord to share information, but at the end of the day, you have to decide: do you accept, what the landlord has asked, or accept what they're willing to negotiate with you, or do you say no, and then the rental board will calculate it? So this is very hard to know in advance exactly what the rental board would calculate.
I'm going to end it there because I know it's 10:49 and you got to skedaddle. So
one more.
One more?
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'll go on the cuff here. So quick question: with legit renovations, let's say you're a senior and you're in a high rise and the elevator is not working and you got mobility issues. And let's say the landlord's I'm going a little off tangent here, but the landlord has been a bit slow in renovating and fixing the elevator. What can you do as a
Okay.
senior with mobility issues?
Well, this is outside. This is a repairs issue.
I
And
know.
then you would have to send the landlord a notice saying that they have 10 days to repair this, or you will take an action at the rental board, for example, deposit your rent. What I will say very quickly here is the more people who are in on it, the more pressure. If there's 40 units in the building, try to get 40 or 20 people. And also, remember I mentioned the Comité Logement, the housing committee, they can be very helpful, like knocking on people's doors to get, help you get organized to contest as a block. So we will have to leave it there.
Thank you once again, Katia. Thank you for doing all the questions for us. It's been marvelous, very informative. And as we've done in the past, your presentation will be sent out. People can be able to see it and digest it a little better, make note of the resources you provided. Thank you once again. I know you have been pressured with time today. Greatly appreciated, and have a marvelous rest of the day.
You too.
And the rest of us, we're going to take a 10-minute health
Bye-bye.
break. And I'd like you all to come back for 11 o'clock sharp. And we're going to listen to Marie-Claude Giguère, who is going to give us tremendous amount of valuable information on considering a move and what you should think about in advance. So we'll be back at 11.
Thank you, Ruth.
My cell is saying 11 o'clock, so I think we can come back. So welcome back, everybody, to our second portion of our webinar. And as I mentioned briefly before, it's an absolute pleasure to have this expert with us today, but also besides being an expert on helping seniors plan their move, or should they stay, she's also a very personal friend, and it's a delight for me to introduce Marie-Claude Giguère, who is the founder and the consultant, and her book and her business is Stay or Move. Helping Seniors Adaptation and Relocation Services is based in Montreal. Marie-Claude has been working with elderly for over 25 years. She guides seniors and their families through the process of finding thoughtful solutions when it comes to a change in autonomy. Her belief is that with the right approach, seniors will thrive during and after a transitionary period when they are welcomed into, and she welcomes them into every aspect of conversation at every step along the way. As a lifelong advocate for seniors, Marie-Claude, as a respected speaker at industry conferences throughout North America, blogs regularly on topics about elderly and aging, and has visited over 450 seniors living options throughout Canada, the United States, and Europe, including the world-renowned Dementia Village in the Netherlands. She is also an award-winning author and illustrator for her books Stay or Move and Grandma's Place. Marie-Claude's life is centered on changing the language we use when seniors face a change in autonomy. Her belief is seniors are to be seen as who they are, not what they have lost. And without further ado, I'm so excited to hear your presentation, Marie-Claude. Thank you for doing this for us, and I'm turning it right over to you.
Ruth, thank you so much for this, and thank you for this invitation. Good morning to everybody. What a lovely subject. I really enjoyed Rick's presentation as well. There's always a lot to learn, and there's always a lot of legalities that surround where we're living, right? And it's important to be well supported in that. So Brendan, I'm ready for the presentation. So I'm not touching anything legal. I'm really going about the heart and about the approach and who wants to move. And it's always a big thing to consider when we are moving. So let's dive in. When we are considering a move, there's always a lot to consider. There's a lot of fear, there's a lot of emotions, there's a lot of things to consider. So Brendan, let's dive in to see the overview. So we're going to be discussing preparing a move and downsizing, who your community is and the support systems that support you, and what to consider should you move in your new setup. And then there'll be time for questions. So along the way, as I'm presenting, if you have any questions, please do put it in the chat, and then we'll discuss it afterwards. Next slide, please. So preparing a move and downsizing. My question to you is, why are you considering this? Obviously, something has come up to make you think that it's time to move, it's time to adjust, it's time to adapt. There's something in you that's bringing up this question. And if we boil it down, it's really about adapting to your current needs and your new realities. Is it the steps in the building that are becoming too hard? Is it that you're tired of getting rent increases? Is it that the neighbors are bothering you? Is it that you're feeling more isolated? There's something at the core that makes you think that now might be a good time to move, or that you should be planning a move. It could be going towards something that you feel is better for you. So just keep in mind that we're a living, breathing person, and life constantly happens and is constantly evolving. But if you think of it as your current needs and your new realities, I think that can help you just hone in to what might be happening next. Next slide, please. When you become, or if you become overwhelmed with fear, or you feel stuck, or you feel like I can't take this on, I can't do any of this at all, this is way too much for me. When you say this is too much for me, what is this? Is it about planning the move? Is it about understanding how your new furniture would fit in? Is it about selling different things? Is it finding the support? But if you can label and boil down, what is it that you're afraid of? I'm afraid of going to a new community. I'm afraid of losing my friends. I'm afraid of having to coordinate everything that I need to do, and who can help me. But if you can put it into words what you are afraid of, then I think it'll empower you to understand, okay, so it's okay. Tommy can be there on moving day to help me. It's okay. I don't necessarily need to move that couch. It's okay. Like, I think you'll allow yourself permission to say, okay, this is huge, but let's take it one bite at a time. But if you can identify this and that and it as you go through the process, I think it'll empower you. And the next slide. So I don't know what happened to the PowerPoint, but that's okay. To me, there's just a couple words that are off. But what I would like for you to do when you think that this is perhaps the time to move, I would want you to sit back in a space where you have a good vision of a good part of your apartment, or sit in your living room or dining room and then go to your kitchen or go to your bedroom and just sit there. No action required. Just take in what surrounds you, take in what you're feeling, and think about that bookshelf and the books on that bookshelf, and think about, if I were to move, what am I ready to let go of? Like, what are my current needs right now? And what do I want for myself? Do I really need all that collection of gardening books? And can I let them go now? Is it okay if I offer them to somebody else who might be gardening, whereas I've taken a step back from it? So my thought process is, who are you today? What do you want to travel with? And what are you ready to let go of? So as you sit through every room, just take a mental note of, I love that painting. I'd love to move that painting. And let's make sure what I find for myself, I'll be able to move that painting. You don't need to write anything down, but if you want to, then you can take notes while you're in every room and just say, okay, I don't need that. I don't need that, or I want that, right? But again, just sit and contemplate with the space that's around you and dream of where you're going to next. And I'm ready for the next slide. One huge thing that I've learned and I've discovered about moving, it's all about our systems. Think of all the systems that we touch on a daily basis. What did we do this morning? We took a shower. So where was our soap and where was our towel? Where was our toothbrush? We had breakfast. So where we put our forks and our spoons and how we loaded the dishwasher. All these things are all systems. I've helped different seniors move, including people with memory loss. And there was one lady who Alzheimer's was consuming her daily practices of everything. One of the last things that I did was to move the manicure items and her little mirror and everything that sat in front of her on her coffee table. What I did after she had left the room, and she had unfortunately left her house for the last time, but I was helping her relocate. I took the items that were on her coffee table. I took a picture of them and I basically did this and moved them right to her new residence. And guys, I can't tell you how overwhelmed I was when she said, the first thing she said when she walked into her new space, this feels like home. I had put the manicure sets as random as she had it, as random as her apartment was. I basically took all her systems and I just moved them over to the edge. This picture that you see of the spoon on the washing machine seemed a little bit weird to me, but I was helping a gentleman move. And if you are helping somebody move, pay attention to these details, because this gentleman I know had a fused back. He was in the hospital and I was helping him relocate. I said, what is this spoon doing here? But I think I need to move this spoon and make sure that it is in the same location for him, because this is one of his systems. As simple as it might seem, this spoon was his reacher to help him get to the bottom of that barrel in the washing machine. So systems are hugely important. And I think if we pay attention to the systems throughout the process of moving can be demystified and simplified if we cup our hands underneath everything and move it over. Obviously, that takes a lot of attention to a lot of detail. Next slide. So just before diving in, just to recap, just pay attention to what your thoughts are in terms of what you're moving to, what you want, and if you are thinking of moving, what you're ready to let go of. But pay attention to those systems that you want to cup your hands underneath and protect. And who surrounds you? If you are moving or if you are staying at home and aging at home and adapting, who is your community? Who's there for you? And who's your support system? Next slide, please. Just never forget that what is good for Mrs. Smith or what's good for Nick across the street is not necessarily good for you. You are unique. You have a unique setup. You have unique friends, unique communities. So I know sometimes people say, oh, I need to get a walker just like her, or I need to get a cane just like her, or I want to move to that retirement residence, or I like that building just like her or him. Just keep in mind that what is good for one person might not be good for the other person, because there are certain things that aren't visible in terms of what the other person is choosing for themselves and doing for themselves. It's always a case-by-case setup for every person. A married couple compared to somebody who's single, there's a lot more different conversations happening here amongst the couple, and there's a compromise. Whereas here, as the person who wants to do their own thing and can, there's fewer compromise, but they make it about what is good for them, right? So just always keep in mind, it's not about being selfish. It's not about being, you know, the center of the world or anything, but it's about being the center of your life and doing it the way that you want and what makes sense for you. Next one, please, Brendan. So the support systems, I see support systems as being as two-tiered, basically. There's one that's more silent, which is our sounding boards. As I was talking before with the couple who might be moving or adapting, often they have pillow talk and they can discuss different things that might be, you know, that it or that this that they're scared about. They have somebody that they can bounce it off of, compared to me who might be single and not anybody to bounce it off of other than the support system that I've created in my sounding board. So I see one as sounding boards, which is really, really important because that's more the psychological, emotional support. And if you're anything like me, before we take on anything big, we might look like we're taking action really quickly, but we're a lot of a crock pot and we need different thoughts and processes and time and patience to be able to go, oh yes, no, this is what I need to do and this is how I'm going to do it, right? Sometimes when we get to that point, there's a lot of people that we've consulted. There's a lot of confidants that surround us. So make sure that you have those people and say, hey, listen, I'm afraid of this. I'm thinking of this. What do you think? I understand that what you think might not be for me, but at least I can siphon through what I feel feels right for me and my next step. And that could be aging at home, or that could be relocating. And I say aging at home in the sense I do specialize in working with seniors. When I say aging at home, at 52, I'm aging at home as well. At 76, you're aging wherever you are. You could be in a retirement residence and aging at home as well, because we're all aging. So for me, aging is almost like living, right? We're taking on life and we're doing it the best way we know how. The next thing is to turn and see who is there for your support system. Who can help you put the books that you don't want off the shelf and into a box and, you know, off into the car. Specific tasks, specific asks in terms of who can be there that you trust, that you know will show up, that you have confidence in, and they can support you through this journey of deciding to age at home. And that could be different things that you bring into your house or the residence or whatever it is, the type of service that you need. Or if you're relocating, how to make that happen for you. People are there. I know it's hard to put our hand up in the air, but think of when a friend puts their hand up in the air, how willing you are to help. It's the same thing for you. It's a beautiful, vulnerable thing to ask for help, and people will show up, and allow those who are there on your team and allow them in. Next slide, please. So again, the support systems are always very different for every person. I might have a confidant in my hairdresser and I see her or him every 6 weeks. I might get a withdrawal from that, and I might have something in my life that goes, oh my God, it's not that I need a haircut, I just need to see my hairdresser, you know? So tune into the people who are around you who can support you, and do recognize that it's okay. The setup that you currently have right now is okay, and make it good for you. Widowed or married is a different type of setup for different people. Somebody who's widowed, that team member is not there anymore, so it's a lot harder. So try and rebalance that off balanceness that you might have lost, because people are there to help you. I know this conversation about should I move or not move, if we have children or not. Sometimes children want to force us or feel like it's bullying us into a certain direction. And I mean, often that's done out of love. It might not seem like it, but often that's done out of love and not knowing how to help, how to be there and how to show up. But just remind them that this is your life. This is the first time you are here, and that this, you're doing the best you can, and you're just trying to figure it out, and if you should move or not, and you are exploring it. Exploring it will cost you time, but if you become more educated about what surrounds you and what kind of solutions you can have for you, all the options will be out in front of you, right? And I know that the support systems, if we're in a city compared to rural, can be very different. Often a support system can be closer in the city simply because of the proximity of staff or people that can provide a service compared to rural. But I know with creative thoughts, creative processes, that there is a beautiful system that can be there for you in terms of the sounding board and as well as the physical support. Just be open and vulnerable to be able to allow people in to help you if you are considering a move, and ultimately if you are moving, that they are still there. And different people will bring different things to the table, so be open to that. It might challenge you, it might want you to cross your arms and say, get the heck out of here. I get it. Allow that process to happen so that the outcome is a beautiful solution for you. And the next slide. So we're going to go into what to consider in your new setup. How exciting it is, as fearful as it can be. I think a move can be a good thing. It can help us adapt to carry what we have today and who we are today to a new space. It allows us to perhaps get new cushions for a different color palette in our space. It can sometimes clear some heavy energy that might have been in our old space to bring it to our new space, right? So I invite that permission of getting yourself to be who you are today and updating your systems if you need to, lightening up the systems and making it good for yourself. But how about that next slide, Brandon? So what to consider in your next space? I don't know where you're living now. I don't know if there's an elevator. I don't know if you're in a house. I don't know if you're in a bungalow. I don't know if you're in a duplex. I don't know where the washer dryer is. I don't know what you've planned for yourself. I don't know your finances. Think of your next step and think about aging. Please plan for it. We're all aging and we can't stop it. And the only thing that I invite us to do is to make it as sunny as possible for us, but we need to plan for that. So does your new space have stairs or not? That's something to consider. What about door sills, right? How heavy are the windows open to open? Is there a patio there for your gardening? And do you want to hold on to those gardening books? All these kind of things really matter in your daily setup and how you're going to use it. So is there going to be a new view for you? Exciting. How important is that daylight for you, right? If you flirt with depression, pay attention to the light that's going to be there for you. And think of, stepping in and out of the bathtub. Is that getting a little bit more difficult? Then pay attention to those details, because again, our systems on a daily basis will affect who and how you are and how you show up in your daily, right? The new layout as well. I know some people who are like, this buffet is moving with me. I don't care. It's my grandmother's. It's moving with me, and I'm moving with all the dishes. Fabulous. That buffet can move, but we need to find the apartment that'll fit that buffet, that has the wall that's big enough. And we also need to make sure that you can flow around your space properly. But when you sit in your new chair or your lazy boy chair that's tattered, which I hope it is sometimes, if you're sitting there, I want you to feel that lightness of this newness that you've allowed into your space, which is really cool to feel. Yes, you do have to pass through the struggles of making that happen, but there is a lot of good that can come from it. Also think of the new neighborhood that you're going to be in, the new community, or is it just down the street? If you're certainly changing postal codes or neighborhoods, or all the way over there, or you're going to move close to Tommy, who's your son, a lot is going to change. That person behind the counter who sells you your milk, that banker, is not going to be there anymore. Those smiles that you're used to having, all those communities around you are going to change. So it's important to, perhaps before you're going to move to this new place, go and explore and go walk that neighborhood, go sit and have a coffee and see who the new neighbors might be to get a feel for it. You can rebuild it. I know that you can. It is challenging, but if you have it in you, it's all there for you. And there will always be people smiling around you if you bring a smile to them, I think. So your new neighborhoods too, are you considering of retiring from driving? That's a big one. If you are, make sure that the stores are close. Make sure that public transportation is close. Be ready to pay for the cab to go to the opera, to whatever show you want to go. Make sure that you plan for that financially as well, just to know, but I know that taking a cab is often less expensive than maintaining a car, the upkeep of a car. So plan on that and provide yourself permission to be who you are today with your new realities. And the next slide, please. The big one, I love the fact that if you're thinking of moving, that you get new and shiny and fun things. New technology is really hard to learn. I'm 52. It challenges me all the time. I'm so deathly afraid of getting a new phone because I don't really have support to help me with it. New remote control, either if you're going from Bell or from Videotron, when you're moving, sometimes the new apartment will have a new provider, and that changes simple things. I know it might seem silly, but when I sit at night, tired of my day, and all I'm looking for is comfort, there's nothing more enjoyable than just doing it compared to like, I'm so challenged by this now, I don't know how to do it. So if you are moving, don't let go of items that offer you a lot of comfort. This coffee machine, it might not be the exact coffee machine, but I had a lady who was moving. She was 90 years old. She was moving from Montreal to BC to be closer to her children. Let's not move the coffee machine because it's too expensive. Let's not move the coffee machine because it's too expensive. And I said, could you please move the coffee machine at whatever cost it will be? It'll be less expensive on your mother to move that coffee machine, put it in a box so that when she wakes up every day, she will know how to press that button. She will know her coffee machine and she can offer herself that comfort. They did not move the coffee machine. Guess who was making the coffee every morning for his mother? Was her son. I can't imagine how overwhelming that lady was, or how overwhelmed that lady was in her new space. Oh, it makes me want to cry. And that level of comfort that wasn't worth the investment for her. It was like, can we please pay attention to these details? Because they offer us that level of autonomy that we feel we lose when we move. So pay attention to these things. And I don't care if it's rusty or broken, but whatever offers you comfort is so important to protect, because it's part of those systems that help us live independently and happily every day. Wow, that was a lot of emotion. I was pissed off when that coffee machine didn't move, but anyways, next slide, please. So one of the things is that if your systems go into boxes for too long, first of all, there's that level of security where you can trip on a box in the hall. It's not fun because brown isn't fun to look at. Most boxes are brown. You also lose sight of your systems and your belongings. So you kind of lose sight of what you're going to be bringing and what's going to be new for you, right? So I recommend that you don't live in boxes for too long, a couple days before and a couple days after kind of thing, but try and create a team around you and have the finances, if you can, to pack and then unpack really quickly, so that it's just a blip of time and that we really can successfully carry you and carry the systems and all of your belongings that you cherish, that you want to carry with you, and do it in a fine fashion. So try not to live in boxes is my recommendation. And the next slide, please. I have a question for you. A lot of people wonder about this, but true or false? Aging at home is less expensive than moving to senior living. I'll give you a second. It's my experience that there is a balance. If you start needing more support and more care, if I'm alone at home and I support the full cost of my care, it might become more expensive than me moving closer to a community, I'll say senior living, where we share that cost. Because I don't need a full shift of 4 hours to come and help me with my bath. I might only need 30 minutes, but the minimum cost for care, if you're going private, could be 4 hours, but I don't necessarily need 4 hours. So at some point, there is often a balance where aging at home would become more expensive than relocating to senior living or to an environment that has services that are closer for you. I'm not only talking about financial costs, there's also emotional cost, physical costs, and all types of costs related to it. If you're not feeling safe at home, that's a huge cost. If you're afraid when you turn off the lights at night, that's a huge cost. So pay attention to that and take on what you're willing to assume. All right. Next slide. This is really one of my focuses in life and my mission in life. I don't know why we say to put or to place a senior in a retirement residence. For me, it's as if they're an object and being pushed off to the side, which is truly not the case. If you are contemplating moving to a senior living product and you're leaving your home, your apartment, the house that you built with your husband, please know that it's not about putting or placing you somewhere. It's really about helping you relocate, helping you move, helping you adapt, helping you find solutions. And again, this is all about your current needs and your new realities. If it can help you, then why not? This is your life and your unique needs. So do find solutions and do know that our wording that surrounds moving, especially when we're older or when there's a change in our autonomy, there's a lot of bulldozering out there and it's not right. And I'm just trying to change that so that we have more positive language and that our words do matter. And the next slide, please. No matter where you're at, if you're going to decide to age at home, if you're going to decide to relocate, if you're going to decide to downsize, if you're going to go live with your daughter in her home, honor where you're at, honor what you need, honor each process of the process, and honor every item. If oil needs to be brought to the eco center, please take the time to do it. If you want to sell a Lalique vase that was your grandmother's, please do it and allow yourself to let it go. But honor everything, every person throughout the process and every item. I work with honor, and it's really cool to see what that does. And the next slide, Brandon. Whatever you decide, as you sit in that lazy boy chair or on your couch in your living room, if it feels right, you'll know. And then that's when you can move forward and it'll feel light. And that's my presentation.
Thank you, Marie-Claude. I knew it was going to get emotional. I knew it was going to give us a lot of very practical information. Now's the time, people, get those questions or comments into the chat box. So Kathy has something to ask of Marie-Claude. I was particularly touched about your comments about, and I think some families do it even jokingly. I know my kids do it. Oh, mother, it's time to place you. I think we can very easily fall into that trap of using the trendy words or what seems to be the norm, which really does have a very negative concept. And the person on the receiving end, it can really have an impact. I don't know if questions have come in yet or not, but I'll throw out a concern I have. I find this very emotional because I'm at the stage. Do I move? Do I stay? Do I get closer to medical services? Do I avoid the steps I'm dealing with? But my kids are all out here. But they have their life and I have my networks in the city. So that's some of the mix. But one of the things when you're thinking about, do you go into an autonomous seniors residence? Do you go into another apartment, which you can barely afford these days? Is losing the independence, let's say you chose a seniors residence, be it autonomous. The one thing I dread is that 8, 9 o'clock lights go out and you must go to bed. I'm a bit of a night owl and I don't want to lose that independence. Is there something you can advise us, Marie-Claude, of how we can address that or check into it before we make final decisions? And then Katia, hopefully you've got some questions that are coming up.
I think, Ruth, that's a very good question. I think a lot of it is a conversation. When you're visiting, if it is senior living and you're so, I mean, we could be moving to all over the place, right? It could be an HLM, it could be different things, but if there's services, so senior living is not, so a lot of people think I'm moving into senior living and I'm going to lose my autonomy. It's really not about losing your autonomy. We want you as autonomous as possible. What my definition of senior living is really about bringing that community closer to you. The concert comes to you, the doctor comes to you, the nurse is on site. Everything is on site for you or closer to you. And you don't need to shovel your front doorway in the summertime, in the wintertime, sorry, wrong season. Senior living is not about taking away your autonomy. You might be living a change in your autonomy. I used to say losing autonomy, but now I've switched it to change because I find it more positive. If you are a night owl, speak to the rental agent and speak to the staff there and say, this is me. How can we adapt to me? Can my breakfast be delivered to me? Can I have lunch later? Is that okay? Express who you are, because you're not going to change, Ruth, right? You're just going to get better and better as to who you are, and you're going to become a more beautiful Ruth. And we can't change that, right? And just say, I can't assume the cost of breakfast because I know I'm not going to be there because I only get to bed at 2 a.m., right? So for me, I think it's always an open conversation of, I really love your building. I love what you offer, but this is who I am and how can I fit in? And verbalize that and make it, but it is hard. And yes, residences, especially the meals, are more, I'm going to say, regimented, right?
You took the word out of my mouth.
Yeah, but when you're in your apartment, you do what you want in your apartment. You rent that space. You can have a lover come over. You can have your friends come over. You can have dinner and you can drink your wine. Everything is always a conversation, but the space that you're renting is your space and you can do with it as you wish. Just don't paint the walls black and start a hairdressing salon, right? But it is for you to live there and to benefit from it.
I'm wondering, Marie-Claude, if you, and then while you're doing that, I will check with Katia about the questions. I'm wondering if you could spend maybe 3-4 minutes or 5 telling us what helping seniors service can do for seniors who are maybe approaching these kinds of decisions and thinking, or that they know about your service so that when they're faced with it, they have options of where they could go to get help.
Mm-hmm. So there aren't that many people who specialize in staying or moving, and that's something that I've trademarked in terms of, even if you're living in senior living in a retirement residence and people say, well, she ought to move because there isn't enough there for her. For me, it's always, let's explore staying at home first and then moving, because who wants to move, right? So I start with a consultation fee, Ruth, of stay or move consult. It lasts about an hour and a half. We just go through and we talk just like I'm talking now. Why am I here? What's going on? What has brought this on? What do you want? What are your fears, concern? Aging at home is an option, and adapting or relocating, and then talking about different retirement residences and the products that are out there, or the offerings, right? Because a lot of people have never set foot in a residence, or they only see it in the news, and it's like so unattractive that they don't even want to go. Again, paying attention to the language we use and not putting or placing, I think, is hugely important. But then, so if somebody wants to adapt at home, Ruth, I can recommend services and I can assist them in finding whatever solution they might want. If they're looking to move, I do specialize in senior living products. So anything that's privately run for seniors, either from fully autonomous to full care, I can assist with the research. I can accompany during the visits. I can be there for the signing of the lease. I am a real estate broker. I legally had to be a real estate broker because the real estate law said if you're helping somebody rent, sell, or exchange immovable, you need to be a real estate agent. I became one. I don't list the homes, but I can advocate and I can be on the senior side to help them market the house the way that it needs to be. So lighten up that bookcase a little bit for photo day. So I can assist with selling the house. I can oversee the move. I can help them choose the retirement residence that suits their needs. And then I can help pack, unpack, downsize, bring items to the auction house, set up the artwork, and la-di-da-di-da. It's all fun and games. And I often get people saying, well, I never thought this could be fun. And it really is. It can be fun. It can be fun. It can be fun to lighten the load. It can be fun to get into a new space where you feel safe. And it can be fun to, you know, just have your systems like that and pay attention to detail. So basically that's what I do. And I have so much fun.
I know you do. That's a big job, Marie-Claude. And I believe if you're finding a place for seniors in a residence, be it a private one, the senior is not charged. It's the fee to you is paid by the resident, right?
Not in my case. So I stand different than the competitors. I stand different than what's out there in the market. I work for the senior and the senior. My competitors offer a free service. I do not. I don't believe in it. I feel that there should be a fee for it. So I do divulge to the client that yes, some residences pay a commission fee, which is often the first month's rent. But my goal, Ruth, is really to refer all residences, whether I'm paid or not, because my goal is to find the best place where my client's going to bloom. So by having an hourly rate for my service, I can also be there for every step. Whereas if I just focused on the retirement residence and the retirement residence paying me, I would only refer to what is good for me. But I really want to work for the senior and really offer that whole offering for the senior to ensure that the transition goes smoothly. So that hourly rate allows me to be there at every step. The only time I don't have a fee is when a real estate agent comes into the room where I've invited the real estate agent. Then I receive a commission from the real estate agent at that point, which is standard practice in the industry. And again, I divulge that to the client. But I do have a fee. Helping Seniors does have a fee for every step of and I believe that creates more engagement on the senior as well. But it makes sure that I work for the client.
Perfect. Thank you very much for that, Marie-Claude. I just got word from Katia. She's ready with some questions. So I'm going to turn it over to Katia. And we have about 10 minutes.
Hi. One quick question before we start, Marie-Claude. Is it okay if we share your presentation? Because there were gremlins in Zoom.
There were gremlins, and if it got mucked up, I can send you the original if that could help.
No. The original's fine. It's just the Zoom gods today said no, so so it's okay if we share it with everyone.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So an interesting question came in about kind of the anxiety that some seniors feel if to move into a residence, that they might be that no one will visit them, or they'll get even not even more isolated, but there's a risk of isolation. And so this person was wondering, do you have any tips on how you can reassure seniors that that might not be the case?
I can't say that. What I would say is, what have you built for yourself? How many cards do you send out? How many phone calls do you make? It's only by sending out that we receive in, right? So the people, the friends who are around you, how do you invest in them? It's really about what you emit out that will come back to you. what I find, unfortunately, Katsia, is as we age and we look back, we are really living what we have built for ourselves. Start building now, start making it happen for yourself now, because if you want people to come to you, you also have to go to them. We can't just sit back. We have to lean in our lives. And honestly, I think what we saw in COVID, where everybody is exposed, right? If I'm married and I have a family of 4 and I have a house and I'm like kind of protected. Whereas I might actually be quite isolated, but nobody thinks I am isolated, or I was, right? When I become completely exposed and my family isn't around me and I don't have a job anymore, I become quite vulnerable. But what shows up for me is the life that I built for me. So I can't say that isolation is going to break, because there needs to be a desire on that person's part. If there are activities there, go. It's really hard though. It does feel like high school. There are cliques. It's hard to make friends. It's hard to reconnect. But if you remain vulnerable and interested and keep leaning into your life, I think that's when the isolation breaks. But there needs to be some type of vulnerability there.
Okay, so I'm going on the cuff because there was lovely conversations and people giving tips and kind of exchanging stories in the chat. But so I'm not a senior, but I have 2 seniors in my life, and we've started this whole conversation about downsizing, moving, and all that, which is a tricky one. And I think, and I'm gonna go on my soapbox for 2 seconds. As a society, we don't really have this conversation. We don't really prepare people on how to have this conversation. So myself, I'm in my 40s. My friends and my cousins were all kind of dealing with this right now. So I guess my first question is, at some point that you're gonna have to have this conversation with a grandparent, parent, who, what have you. So how's the best way to start this? Is there, for lack of a better word, a timeline? Like, how do you get the ball rolling with the senior on, okay, mom, okay, dad, can you live in this house? Do you want to live in this house? If you want to stay in this house, how can we adapt this house for this new reality of where you're at? What do you want to keep? What do you want to replace? How do you go about this?
I would ask about planning. What are you planning? What do you want? I mean, you raised our family here. It seems big now, but what are you planning? Like, are you going to keep it for the grandchildren to come and visit? Are you going to renovate and put a shower, but you still want a bath because you want the grandchildren to bathe here? What are you planning for yourself? One thing too, Katya, what I would recommend is the will and the mandate and the power of attorney and the legalese of the life of the people that you're helping. There are so many taboos around this, but I really think that if you simply see the person for who they are and not as an object, and it's time to, and it's like, time for who? Like, who are you to tell me that it's time for my life? Because we're not a milk carton with an expiry date, and we don't know when life is going to happen. It happens all the time. But for me, it's an open conversation. And I would suggest that you ask that for your friends who are 42. What are you planning? What's next for you? How long is that plan? You want to get to Italy and Germany, and you want to do this and you want to do that, but like in 10 years? How are you planning for that financially? Are you physically able to climb that mountain? What are you doing for yourself, and what are you investing in? But I would start with not labeling different things, but what are you planning? Open question. Oh, we're planning next year on going to. Awesomeness. Is mom going with you, or is it just you? Let's plan for it. I'll be there for you, right? But I would continue the dreams and the planning and the financial things, and not itemize everything, and not finger point, but just let them answer what they're planning for themselves is what I would recommend.
So I guess in that, life happens, right? So always kind of be prepared for the unexpected. So I know that a lot of seniors kind of want to stay at home for as long as possible because it's home, right? That's their comfort zone, and it's just home. So how do you, as a child, grandchild, what have you, adopted kid, someone who's just taking care of your neighbor, if you know that there's a possibility of, say, medical issues such as, I don't know, dementia or Alzheimer's or what have you, how is there a way to kind of prep a space for that?
A space
Or
for
you
the
just-
conversation, you mean? A space for the
Yeah, a
conversation?
space for the conversation, and then actually maybe the house. I don't know if that,
What
if
do you,
there's a
what do
way.
you, what are you witnessing? I mean, sometimes I've come in and I've seen towels like that are all like this, when they used to be like this. Oh, I just went to the bathroom and I just saw your towels. Like, is it laundry day? Did you, like, is there something happening? Like, are you overwhelmed with something? Is there something you can, I just noticed a pill on the floor. Did you want me to pick it up? Oh, I see 3. Oh, I see that, you didn't take September 26th, whatever it is. If you can just not finger point, but just as an observer and say, I'm noticing. Is there anything that could help you rebalance that? Is there something? I understand it's hard to put your hand up and you might be afraid, but can we explore the CLSC? Can we explore? Maybe we can go visit a residence. Maybe we can call Nancy and see if she can come in to help you with lunch at lunchtime. Meals on Wheels. Offer like kind of suggestions, and it might be hard if you don't know the different options, but it's like be open with positive language as an observer, basically, and not finger point, right? Who wants a finger pointer in our lives? We all want like support, right?
I don't know if this is the question, but I'm just gonna say it. So basically what you're saying is like this whole downsizing prepping, it's like, I don't want to use the word journey, but it's
Totally
a
agree.
life thing, right? So it's not just the Mary Kondo thing of, does it bring you joy if it doesn't get rid of it? It's actually kind of like this works for this stage of your life, but then always keep in the back of your mind the next chapter, the next phase. That's basically what you're saying?
Yeah, and no matter where we're living, we need to feel safe. Right now, if we're not safe, we'd be running. So what is offering you safety, and how do you maintain that safety? If you're not maintaining it, what can we add to it? What do we take away but safety? We need to feel safe. We need to feel safe. And if that safety balance goes off balance, then how do we regain it? And it might not be here. It might be somewhere else, right? Safety. I want you to feel safe. Are you safe down the stairs? Let's add a railing. Let's adapt, let's modify, let's bring it down. Let's keep you safe. We want you safe. Everybody wants each other safe, right? And there's just a whole bunch of different nuggets that you can bring in. It can be call systems, it can be, ramps, it can be eyes, it can be support, a whole bunch of different things. Just remain creative, remain open, and remain positive. And I think we can change taboos towards seniors and senior living that way, so that we see them for who they are and not seeing through them.
Cool.
I
Thanks for
think-
that, Ruth. I'll toss it to you. Thanks, Marie-Claude.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Katia and Marie-Claude. Time is moving on quickly. Brendan will have a survey that he's going to put up on the screen. We're going to ask everybody to please click on the link and complete it as we're talking.
The
And
survey is available in the chat now.
great, it's in the chat, so just open it up and just click on the answers. We really do need that for our funders and for our stats. So we ask you to take the 2-3 minutes now, because we send it out to people, but unfortunately we don't get the same results and responses back that we need. So we're going to do it now. Marie-Claude, this was most informative, and the way you approach it with such a human, caring approach is remarkable, because it's not a subject that we want to face, generally speaking. Even when you're younger and you got all kinds of energy, and you may be moving from an apartment to a home, and it's a brand new life experience, and you're all excited. Just the physical work of a move is overwhelming. But then when you have other factors that you have to consider, it can be quite daunting. I do like your approach very much. I think it's something for us all to think about, maybe even discuss with family members in the next week or so, because it's fresh in your mind, and sort of, put your feelers out. But I think what I take from it is not to be shy. Consider our needs and our wishes as the priority and important. It's just how to make it easier and maybe more secure for the senior.
Yep.
This was excellent. How are we doing with the survey, Brendan?
I don't see the results, Ruth. I just posted the link in the chat for people to go to.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
There are results coming in, Ruth.
Oh,
There
okay,
you go.
okay.
But
So
also, I
good.
just wanted to add, we're going to be sending the recording of this webinar and the presentation probably next week, just because it's a bit busy here on our end. And in that email, you're also going to get the link to the survey in case for some reason you don't have, you can't fill it out today. The link will be there as well, and it would be great if you could fill it out. And my phone's buzzing, so I'm going to mute myself.
Yeah, please watch for that. Also, at the same time, in about 4 or 5 days, we upload it on Seniors Action Quebec social media. So that's for family and friends, networks that weren't able to make it today. Or if you're one of those seniors who has an adult child in another province and you want to make the discussion or the resources and the information available, they can view it at their leisure. And I think it's always wise to discuss these things before we're faced with the emergency situation or
Yeah.
crisis.
Plan.
Yes, and this is a lady that's just come back from the Magdalen Islands from having done a presentation there. So she does travel across the province and everywhere, giving us very important information. So I think without further ado, I'm going to say thank you all so very much for attending. We have 2 housing webinars coming up on October the 27th, 10:30 to noon, and then 1:30 to 3. And they're important, as we know housing is a hot topic right now and in a crisis situation.